Hello, and welcome to Seeing Jesus with Paul Miller. I'm Liz Voberil, and I'm here with my colleague Robert Rowe, who serves as our student ministry director, as well as Paul Miller. The ministry behind this podcast, seeJesus, creates discipleship tools and trains people in how to use them. Many organizations do important work helping the church to be the hands and feet of Jesus, but seeJesus works on the imagination and the heart. We want to help the church rediscover the beauty of Jesus and catch a vision to live as he lived. So we've been in this series called The Passion of Jesus. We're walking through the studies in the last unit of our Person of Jesus study. And we've been talking the last few episodes about Jesus's humility and how he calls his disciples into that humility too. So that's where we've been. And today we're turning and we're looking at, we're going to start to look at his sadness, these emotions that Jesus is feeling as he turns towards the end of his life. So, and this passion, Paul, we've talked about before, part of what makes this season of his life so vivid is just the end is coming. So everything is a little more intense than it was before, right? So part of what we're seeing, that's part of the background that draws all of this out. Would you add anything to that, Paul?
One of our trainers mentioned to me that these were some of his favorite lessons to teach out of our Person of Jesus study, because he said the passionate is well named. The passion is passionate.
Yeah.
It is very heightened because it's like it is actually kind of like it's not just a crisis for Jesus. It's actually a national crisis. I mean, this is, a big deal. I mean, this whole story grips Jerusalem. So
yeah, it is usually the one place where people, if you ask people, was Jesus ever troubled, or did he ever did you ever see him with emotions being expressed? And almost always they go to Passion Week as a place that comes out. Obviously Jesus is filled with emotion all the way through his life and ministry, but we really see him highlighted in the Passion Week. So I'm looking forward to talking through this.
Yes. I had a pastor in college who liked the contrast of the black velvet on which the diamond of something or the other sparkles, right? And it feels like, the passion, this time of life is like black velvet behind. So we really see the sparkle of Jesus clearly here.
That's a great illustration.
Yeah. Well, the text that we're going to begin with is from Luke 13, and it's actually a series of 3 texts from Luke that look at Jesus grieving over Jerusalem. Why don't you just share that again, Robert, about Jesus grieving over Jerusalem?
Yeah. It's this reality of like the heart behind emotion that we see come out in Jesus, especially the troubled nature of his emotions that come out, and not like I'm an emotionally unhealthy person, but because of studying Jesus as a person, I've become more emotionally healthy. And one of the little moments the Spirit awakened my brain is to think like, man, if I want to know what emotional health looks like, I should probably watch the guy who is the most emotionally healthy that's ever been. And I think to watch Jesus' sadness and his trouble, and the reasons behind it is just going to be fun to unearth for a few minutes.
Yeah. Liz, why don't you go ahead and read this from Luke 13?
This is Luke 13, 34 to 35. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate. I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
So this is a lament. It's actually a long tradition of Hebrew laments that we'll talk about it later maybe in a later podcast, that lament tradition has died out in the church, although it is certainly making a comeback. A lot of people are writing on it. And just to place this is in Luke's travel dialogue. There are about 9 or 10 chapters in Luke that are unique to Luke, that go from roughly Luke 10 through Luke 19. This is in this travel dialogue. Jesus is on his journey to Jerusalem. And so Luke, when he was researching the Gospel of Luke, put together all these different stories of his research in one dialogue. And so we would not know the parable of the Good Samaritan without, or the prodigal son, Zacchaeus, all of these beloved stories come out of this travel. So it's particularly, this whole world is Jewish, but the travel dialogue particularly picks up even the poetry. You can see the Aramaic behind it. It's a very thoroughly Jewish way of looking at things. So it's not unusual that Luke has picked this up. And I think of Paul's one comment about Luke. I think it's in 2 Timothy at the end, where he talks about the beloved Dr. Luke, that, his care, which it's our only window to what he's like as a person, but he must have had a very tender heart, because Luke particularly picks up Jesus' love of people down low. He's particularly attentive to emotions and the down and out. If you take the book of Luke and take Jesus out of it, you have communism. I realize that's a big leap, but the appeal of communism is its care for the little guy, the care for the outsider. Now it makes that into an idol, and it doesn't deal with the human heart. So I don't want to get a big distraction on that, but I just want you to see the power of Luke's vision. Of course, it's Jesus' vision, but even a secularized vision is incredibly powerful. It's a vision of love, of the least. So it's a vision of what a Jesus community looks like that includes the outsider. So it's just, that's a beautiful thing.
I was just going to say, Liz, as you were reading this, what emotions of Jesus kind of jumped off the page at you when you were reading it?
Words like, the longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chick under her wings, but you were not willing. I guess it's typically been easy for me to think of Jesus as he was a man on a mission. He came to do something and he was going to do it and get it done. Just to see that kind of Jesus. And that sort of like, when I conjure up that picture of him, he wouldn't, if he longed for something, he would just make it happen. Like the chick might squirm, but oh, well, here you go. You're under my wing. Right. It's not, there's not anything to long, like just go make it happen if you're so, there is something that we see here that's really different than I think the sort of standard Jesus picture.
Yeah. Robert, what?
Yeah, just those lines, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, that deep.
It's very plaintive. It's very plaintive.
Yeah. And you can imagine like the flood of emotions that are hitting him as he's just looking over the city of his father, that the Father has blessed, and the people that he's called to himself, and their rejection of him as the Son, and just the grief and the longing for them, and knowing what's coming for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The tone that you both picked up, Jesus, you can feel it. Like, like if a child in your family does something really stupid, oh, Mandy, you could just see that as a it's just you could feel his grief and the tenderness. I like the images, so, I have longed to gather your children together, the hen gathering her chicks under her wings. When I used to spend my summers in Oregon, I would try to grab little chicks who stay up at this ranch up in the mountains. And so I saw this as a kid, when I would try to gather the chicks and they would go scurrying under their mother. And I didn't want to mess with
when the mom saw you coming, Paul, I think they went to go try to get their chicks, hide them from that crazy boy.
We used to do it with pigs too. We would tie like lassos. We'd have open lassos on the ground. Did you ever do that, Robert? You're from Tennessee, right? Right. And then we would whip it real quick and grab a little piglet and run up. We had to run up a tree because the mama pig. I mean, some of these were big. I remember when some of these pigs were as big as Jeeps. They would come tearing after you.
Now we're down in the country podcast section.
I won't get into my grief pig stories.
It's just so tender, the words that you were mentioning, your house has left you desolate. So it's this picture of broken intimacy, or of intimacy that never happened, or intimacy, something that could have been, and except for and then it's mirrored with this really, really true and honest image of this, how brutal they are. You who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. So he's going after the hardness of their heart, their will. So it's just, you can feel his heart.
Yeah. And it's not all, like, for me, it used to be all anger. Like, I would probably be super angry if I was Jesus. And like, you can sense that emotion of anger coming out in what you just said, Paul.
Yeah.
But his anger is always coupled with his sadness. And so it's not just anger for anger's sake. It's anger that comes from a grieved heart over what has been lost.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a friend say this many years ago that when we were studying this, he said, sadness is such a pure response to suffering, and we often move to anger. And sometimes the anger is appropriate, but by pure, there's no demand in it. Anger has a demand in it. So just some of these reflections that we have here. And Liz, you said this earlier, just a couple minutes ago, that Jesus doesn't say, "Oh, well, that didn't work out. Let's go on to another nation." And sometimes the way we have presented Jesus and God is that kind of a stoic, that didn't work out, or let's go to plan B. Like,
right. Or almost like it doesn't even matter how you react. I'm going to go on and die on the cross for you. And those are like kind of robot automaton-ish. Like, your emotions don't matter to me and I don't have any emotions in relation to you sort of a thing, like a purely economic atonement that has no love to it.
Yeah. And we've actually there's been a tendency in the church with the lament tradition to think that if you're sad, you need more faith. Like if you had more faith, then you wouldn't be so crushed. And Jesus, who is life himself, his life is crushed at this point. Oh, the brokenness. I mean, just read, he's feeling the loss of the people of Israel, that their rejection of him, particularly the elites, have not with the common people, but the grip of the cultural elites is so powerful. He's feeling their rejection, like those things, those arguments that he has all through the Gospels with the Pharisees, particularly, but also the Sadducees and the teachers, but it's mainly the Pharisees. We can think that and he really hits them hard. I mean, they're going after one another. He feels that. You know what I mean? This is not just abstract. It hits his soul.
It also makes me think there's something that Jesus longed to have with these people, like connection. It's because you don't grieve when there was nothing good you longed for in this, right? So that there's it's not only is it negative, but there's a positive, there's a good that Jesus was longing. I mean, that's love, right? It's love. It's the kind of intimacy that he longed for with the people that hasn't happened. So it just makes it also it kind of underlines that it's not just an economic. Jesus came to die for sins, and so then they get there's a relationship, there's love that's missing. That's part of the grieving.
Yeah. So it's that broken intimacy. And if you look at the Psalms, they're just so rich with that intimacy. They're God's relationship with, Moses and Abraham, where he calls him a friend, and David, who is truly, a man after God's own heart, so that intimacy did happen. And so even though there's a lot of, negative stuff going on there, God is in love with his people.
Yeah. Well, that's the flip side of if Jesus doesn't grieve over the lack of connection, I guess his grief also, there's a way in which, I mean, I don't want to say it like it, but there's something honoring of these people in it too, right? That is the love, is the intimacy, the if we eliminate seeing the grief, then you also eliminate, you don't understand there's something Jesus is valuing and loving. There's something more, there's something going on that's deeper than that. Does that make any sense? Like the grief also tells you something about what Jesus is valuing.
Yes. I mean, what we would call intimacy and community and closeness. And of course, there is a hierarchy here. Jesus is God. But this is what the incarnation is all about.
Yeah. He values these people. He actually loves them, right? Like
Liz, why don't you read this wonderful quote from C.S. Lewis on the nature of love?
There is no safe investment. To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to be sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even to an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. The only place outside of heaven where you can be perfectly safe from all the dangers and perturbations of love is hell.
And that's something. It really is. Robert, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that quote it's always struck me, just the safe, that love is never safe because you are investing your heart into people and things, even the loss of an animal or I just love, I don't think it could be said better than C.S. Lewis has said it here, in his description of what loving something necessarily means, that sadness, is part of that.
And speaking of our whole world is moving towards safety. In fact, the greeting of be safe is now common, especially since COVID. So just if you happen to meet me randomly at a seminar, you can say goodbye. When you see me, you can say God bless you. You can say see you later. But if you tell me be safe, you'll get a 3-minute free pontification on that.
And why that's not your goal.
That's not my goal. I mean, it's just like, what a boring way to live, I mean, love with abandon, you know, go land somewhere, give your life away,
Yes. I guess one thought I have, going back to what I was trying to say a few minutes ago, is I guess if we miss Jesus's sadness and grief here, we are going to shrink his love. We don't fully appreciate, to see that he's sad. It helps us to see his love for us, right? So if he had no emotions in response to the rejection, it would, that reduces what his love is like. So understanding his sadness helps me understand his love. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so you get joy and sadness. Joy then is the fruit of intimacy and obedience. And sadness is the results from the failure of intimacy and obedience. I don't want to just keep it at obedience, because almost all the reason I say that is because obedience involves a surrender of our will to the ways of God. And that's what the will comes out in that quote there. They're killing the prophets. So the prophets are coming and telling them what what they're doing wrong, and they hate that. So they're pushing against the mind of Christ. They're pushing against the ways of God, and our culture is doing that. And it is very sad to see that. It's very sad to see the little mini things on that when you see people just destroying their lives by foolish decisions. It's just very sad to see that. Especially we can see what's going to happen because of what someone is doing. It just breaks your heart,
Part of the reason I think it's important to think through this and how the church reacts to certain things is because we've tended to not look at Jesus for what a healthy reaction should look like. And so we tend to operate on principles and those kind of things. But here we see the sadness of Jesus over and lamenting over a people that have, because he loves them, I can look at Jesus and learn from him, begin to imitate the fact that I am called also to grieve and lament and react with sadness towards those who have run the other direction, or a culture that's falling apart. That my first reaction, I'm learning that my first reaction should be sadness instead of anger.
Yeah. And it's neat to put Jesus' emotions together, and Luke is clearly doing that with the journey. And as we see it, his sadness is driving him towards the cross. You can even say his anger is as well, from the Lazarus 11, when John, in the Gospel of John, mentions twice Jesus' anger as he goes towards Lazarus' tomb. And Warfield mentions, it's something that we had quoted earlier a bunch of months ago, where Jesus is going to the tomb as a warrior, angered at his foe, controlled anger, but anger at his foe. So all his emotions are pushing him into his obedience with his Father.
Mm-hmm. You guys, I can't talk about sadness, anger, joy without thinking of the movie Inside Out 2, which my family saw last weekend, which you guys have seen that before. But the idea is the emotions are presented as like in the console of the human's brain. And, different characters have different chief emotions who kind of like quarterbacking things. But that makes me think because part of what we see in Jesus is his brain is not empty of emotions, right? Like, I think that's the stoic picture we often see would be Jesus doesn't have that. But it is, I mean, he's Jesus. I'm like, should the Holy Spirit be the quarterback? Is that what's missing sometimes? I don't know. Paul, if you've seen that movie yet.
No, but Kim and I, we just have to have a little time Kim and I stay up on most of the movies, although we're deep into reruns at this point.
Well, we waited till this one was streamable on our typical platform. So anyway, but the emotions, right? The interior life, it's seeing that in Jesus and thinking like, what is it that, as you say, Paul, those are all part of his journey to the cross. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode. We will be back again in a couple of weeks, picking up this journey and looking a little further at Jesus's sadness.